This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Score Sheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Hello, and welcome to another Score Sheet podcast. Happy to say that today we have Jason Martinez with us. He started a website called MLB.depthcharts.com a few years ago. He's now a regular writer on the Baseball Prospectus website and pretty much knows everything minor league baseball there is. How are you today, Jason?
I'm doing really good, Jeff. Thanks for having me on. I was on last off season. I had a nice talk with you, so happy to be back on.
Well, we'll see if we can't get you more than once a year. I love talking to guys that know a lot about the minor leagues because I really don't. So we were chatting a minute ago. You've been following the winter leagues down there in the Caribbean?
Yeah, well, I started doing the minor league update column at Baseball Prospectus, which was one of the regular features that Kevin Goldstein did for them. And Kevin Goldstein, of course, got hired by the Houston Astros as their pro scouting coordinator. So they divvied off all his stuff over there. So I got the minor league update just when the winter leagues were starting, Arizona Fall League and things like that. So there's some pretty good prospects there. So you kind of have to, it's not as easy as a regular season where you probably have 20 guys to pick out from, or interesting prospects that had a good day. And so really challenging to find these guys and guys that aren't great prospects, maybe a little bit fringy, and talk about why they're interesting. Why should you know about this guy? What can make him a player that can have an impact? Maybe he can be a middle reliever. I mean, it's challenging, but it's fun because I haven't followed the winter leagues before.
Well, one thing about those Caribbean leagues is it's not just prospects like the Arizona Fall League, but there's guys down there that have been in the majors either off and on for years, or they're rehabbing, or they're older and coming back. Is there anyone down there that maybe you noticed this year that seems like he's on the bounce back path?
It's hard to say, and I have fun with the column because like I said, there's not a lot of prospects there. So sometimes you just notice a guy that hasn't been around for 10 years. I think it was I saw Runelvis Hernandez, who pitched for the Royals way back, 6-7 years ago. I think he was their opening starter one day, and I noticed, this guy's pitching here. And there was a Runelvis Hernandez sighting. That stuff's kind of interesting to me. I mean, there's all, you see guys that have been out of the game for a couple of years. You see Miguel Tejada playing down there, Manny Ramirez, and it's hard to tell if they're on the comeback trail because these stats don't mean much down there. I mean, these guys are 40 years old, still putting up big numbers, but they're playing against guys that have never been even the minor leagues. I mean, guys that have just been playing in the Dominican for their whole lives that are 35 years old. So it's really hard to tell.
So you would definitely not recommend somebody scanning the wire for somebody with great winter league stats and then targeting him in his score sheet draft.
Right, exactly. So that's what I try to do with the column. I try, I'll list the stats, but then I'm going to tell you a little bit about this player, but I'm not going to really tell you he's good because he had 10 hits in the last 2 weeks, or because he had he threw 7 shutout innings. It's really just trying to tell you a little bit more about the player and why he's interesting or not.
Yeah, and then on your MLB.depthcharts.com, the one that you've been doing forever, I like that site because you don't just list the top, this is going to be the Padres starting lineup of 2013. You go all the way down to pretty much the guys that might be up 2 years from now and give an idea of who's really in the Padres' plans, or every major league team for that matter.
When you think about a baseball team, of course you got the 25-man roster, and nowadays these guys get hurt so often, so you really got 35, 40, 50 guys that you need during the season. I mean, in the most extreme cases, like the Padres last year had so many guys hurt. They were shuffling guys up and down, and ended up using a bunch of guys. So the depth is so important. You see these guys, these teams these days. You see what they're doing in the offseason, and you go, well, why are they interested in signing this starting pitcher? They already have 5 starting pitchers, and you look at the stats around the league from 2012, and maybe 2 teams went through the whole season with 5 starting pitchers. You got a team like the Giants who, I think they had one guy, Eric Hacker, make 1 start, but then it was the starting 5. They went the other 161 games. That doesn't happen very often, so you are going to need 7, 8 starting pitchers throughout the season. You're going to need multiple guys that are going to end up in the starting lineup. Guys in the bullpen get hurt. Guys in the bullpen are just really bad one year, and they were good last year. So it's looking at the entire roster, and I have it out on the outside looking in section, which is, upper level guys, and so you can kind of see who's next in line, and then you can kind of see who the prospects are. You go all the way down, and some of these guys move pretty quick. Some of these guys are years away, so I have listed where they played last year, if they're a top prospect, if they were a 2012 draftee. So try to give you as much information there as possible. So once I move, I'm going to be moving most of the information to Baseball Prospectus in the near future. So once I do that, I mean, the main thing there is I'll be able to have a player card for every single player. So you can click on every player, and then you get to their player information and stats and all that stuff.
Well, that'll be neat. Yeah, what you said about pitching is what I've been telling people in Scoresheet, especially guys that are new to Scoresheet forever, is that you just plain cannot have enough pitching. And that there's no way if you tell me, oh, I've got 5 solid starters and a 6th guy that might get a start once every great while. I'm like, well, you better draft 2 more starters. Because, like you said, it's possible to go a whole year with 5 starters, but it's a rare event.
Yeah, and my experience in Scoresheet, I've been playing 3 seasons now. So I jumped in on a team, there was an open team, and Lincecum was there, and Tommy Hansen was there, Jaime Garcia, another really good starting pitcher. And so for 2 seasons, those guys were carrying me. I think I got second place both those first 2 years. And then last year, what happens to all those guys? They weren't good. Jaime Garcia was hurt. Hansen was hurt, and he wasn't very good. And then Lincecum was just all over the place. And so I wasn't good last year. And so, yeah, you're right. You got to have enough starting pitching to cover those kind of scenarios, because they come up every year.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then you update that MLB site during the year. So I think, everybody likes to draft a few prospects in the preseason, but what's really valuable is come like our June midseason draft, when you know where your injuries are and you need now suddenly a shortstop, or maybe you're going to need one in a couple of weeks. Kind of nice to look and see who's at the AAA level for various major league teams and who might come up.
Next in line is so important, because these guys get hurt all the time. Whether it's a hamstring or an oblique. Oblique is so popular these days. And then with the pitchers, Tommy John surgery is going to knock you out for a year and a half. So it's important, and closers are so important in fantasy baseball these days. So these guys always want to know, these fantasy players, who's next in line, and who's next in line, because it seems like it only takes 1 blown save or 2 blown saves for a closer to kind of be on that list where, who should be your closer now? He shouldn't be your closer anymore, unless you're Mariano Rivera and you have that, that reputation of being one of the greatest. It just seems like if you're the closer, you blow 1 save and everybody hates you. You blow 2 saves and they want you out of that job. So these guys are always wanting to know who's next in line, up and coming closer, on this team or that team.
Yeah, there's a wealth of information. So do you have? I'll put you on the spot a little. I mean, everybody knows, of course, about Profer and the top probably prospect on every team, because there's so much more written these days about minor leaguers. But do you have guys that are maybe a little deeper down that still you think have a pretty reasonable shot of coming up this year and put up numbers that might actually help a team?
You look at all these top prospects, and there's no real clear path to the majors. It all kind of, they're just about ready. They get to AA, AAA. You hear all about them, how talented they are, but you don't want to count on these guys, and a guy like, Will Myers in Tampa Bay, who, we thought he was going to get called up in 2012 with Kansas City. They held off on doing that, and now Tampa Bay's in a situation where they're probably going to want to keep him in the minors to push back his arbitration and free agency, so you might not see him till late May. And but he's one of the guys where he's pretty sure he's going to come up and he's going to be in that lineup every single day. And another guy, Travis d'Arnaud, similar situation, but as a catcher, he has you figure the Mets are going to stick him into that starting lineup, and he's a power hitting catcher. He's going to be a future all-star. But as a catcher, is he going to be in one of those situations like Devin Masaraco, in Cincinnati, where you've been hearing about this power hitting catcher for years. He comes up and Dusty Baker sits him on the bench most of the time, and he was. I think it's hard for a rookie to come off the bench and put up numbers. He struggled, so it's hard to count on a catcher, a catching prospect as well. You got a guy like Oscar Taveras. He doesn't have a spot to play in St. Louis because they have Beltran, they have John Jay, they have Matt Holliday. But is Carlos Beltran going to stay healthy for an entire year again? I don't know. I mean, you have this guy there, and it's tempting to, depending on what kind of league you're in, should I stash this guy on the bench because he might be in the minors the whole year? But if somebody gets hurt, I got Oscar Taveras who's playing every day and putting up numbers in the majors, and there's a lot of those situations. And Profar and Mike Olt now in Texas with after they've signed a couple guys in Texas, they're back in the minors and they're just kind of waiting in the wings and waiting for that right opportunity. And then, starting pitching as well. There's a lot of good starting pitchers. I think a guy like Tyler Skaggs with the Diamondbacks can be really good. I think he'll start the year in the rotation. Julio Teheran from the Braves, who he's only 21 years old. Been hearing about him for years. Is one of the top pitching prospects in the game, and fell a little bit off the radar after last year. He had a rough season in AAA, but he could be their number 5 starter. And speaking of the winter leagues, there aren't a lot of prospects, and like I said, stats don't mean much, but in Teheran's case, when a guy who struggled last year, he dominated like his last 3 starts, where I think he had like 15 shutout innings and gave up like 2 hits, and he was dominant. And you go, oh, okay, maybe he figured it out again, even though it might not mean much. But after that, their GM Frank Wren was saying, yeah, he probably has a leg up in this competition for the number 5 spot, and maybe it was. Maybe they saw him pitching in the Dominican and said, wow, this guy, he's got it back. So you got a lot of different situations, a lot of different prospects where you just never know. You just need the opportunity, and then you don't know how they're going to perform. These guys are so talented, but I mean, what we know for sure is Bryce Harper and Mike Trout aren't coming again. They're not showing up again. Those kind of prospects come around every, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And the next tier of guys here, they're really good, but I think people got a little bit too excited about that. So, which is good to, I like to see baseball fans excited about prospects in the minor leagues, but I think the expectations are a little bit high based on what those 2 guys did last year.
Yeah, I think people, the whole Mike Trout thing last year were, people had all, of course, heard of him and everybody expected good things, but obviously nobody expected him to have one of the greatest seasons in the history of baseball. And now I think there's a lot of fantasy players who are like, oh, well, that's easy. I'll just pick the next Mike Trout and he'll lead me to a championship. But like you said, it's like once every 100 years a rookie comes up and has a year like that. Maybe not 100 years, but the last one that had a year even anywhere near comparable as rookie was maybe Fred Lynn 30 years ago.
Oh yeah, and a lot of people think Jurickson Profar is a top prospect in baseball now, but he's not going to come up and steal 30 bases and hit 25 home runs. He's really good defensively. He can probably hit 300 in the majors. He could probably give you 15 home runs and 20 stolen bases, and that's amazing for a shortstop. But he might not be able to do that as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old or whatever he is now. I think eventually he's going to be that, and that's why he's the top prospect in baseball. But it doesn't mean he's going to come up and give you huge fantasy numbers right away. So, but I'm sure he would be a nice, a nice addition to your team, for the next several years. But as far as Troy Tulowitzki hitting his 30 homers or whatever he's capable of, he's not going to. Profar is not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, when they get unblocked, I mean, there's a lot goes into these prospects. You got position blocking. If you got Elvin Andrus blocking you at shortstop, you need a trade or an injury before you can get up. And then, especially for pitchers, I think that they can say what they want about how good a guy is when he's 19, but it's hard to predict pitchers at least if they're still in the single A level.
Yeah, and you look at maybe the top pitching prospect in baseball, Dylan Bundy, from the Orioles, and you saw what he did in low A last year. They couldn't touch him. He moved up to high. He was still dominant, moved all the way to the majors and pitched a couple innings, and they think he's ready for the big leagues. But the Orioles are still trying to fill out that pitching staff. They had some guys step up last year. They can probably start the season with 5 pretty good starting pitchers, and Bundy in the minors, which is where he should start. And they're still looking for starting pitching depth. They're still looking at a Joe Saunders and looking into trading for Rick Porcello. And where does Dylan Bundy fit in? Where if you're a fan, you figure why are you signing all these guys? And what about Bundy? But when Bundy's ready, it's kind of like these guys aren't as good as Bundy when Bundy is ready for the majors. You find a spot for Bundy, and one of these guys is going to go to the bullpen or the minors or whatever it is. But in a case like that, it's not really waiting for an opportunity as far as somebody needs to get. I mean, it could be somebody gets hurt and then he gets to the big leagues. But I think once he's ready, you just move somebody out of the way. He's in your rotation because he's going to be a top of the rotation starter.
Right. Well, teams do, like you mentioned about Will Myers. Sometimes they do like to keep a guy in the minors for at least the first couple months just to push their whole arbitration/free agent clock. back a year. If you can keep Will Myers or Mundy or somebody down in the minors till June, you could save a few $1,000,000 down the road by getting one more year of them under team control.
Yeah, and you see in a case like the Nationals with Bryce Harper, they know they're going to be in this pennant race, so they didn't really mess around with that. He started the season with the team. He's going to help them win, and at the end of the year, if you're in a pennant race and you lose by 2 or 3 games, you miss the playoffs. Oh, April means something, May means something, and so you don't want to mess around. If you're the Nationals last year and you say, well, if we know Bryce Harper's going to help us win a couple extra games in April and May, then forget it. We'll deal with him hitting free agency early in the future. If you look at a team like the Mets, who aren't expected to compete this year, then it's a no-brainer. Travis d'Arnaud, you start him in the minors. Sometimes you want to do it for the fan base and you want to get the fan base excited, but it's not smart baseball to the guy leaves a year early, or you're paying the guy millions of extra dollars because he was eligible for arbitration a year earlier. That's not good business for a couple extra wins in April and May.
You're right. Or a team like Toronto, who might, I think if I was in Vegas today and I had to bet, which I'm not really much of a bettor, I'd take the odds and pick Toronto because I kind of like their chances. So a team like that, where 2 extra wins really might make the difference between first and third, yeah, any young prospect they have that they think can win a game in April, they should be bringing him up.
Oh yeah, the Blue Jays are stacked. I like that team. They're deep. They don't have a lot of holes, not a lot of weaknesses. You got, and somebody was asking me earlier about Jay Happ, who I have projected in the as the long reliever right now, and they said, well, he's probably going to start in AAA, and I said, well, they're paying him $4 million. I don't think they want to keep him in AAA. But then you think about it, it's like it doesn't matter. Their only goal right now is to win the World Series in 2013. It doesn't matter if they're paying a guy $4 million in AAA. He's their 6th starter, and they need him to be ready if one of those guys gets hurt. So it's a really different mentality from a contending team, especially one as good as the Blue Jays can be, where they're going all out in 2013.
Yeah, they're going to play for it. Well, having a guy that is a team's real-life 6th starter is not a bad thing to have on score sheet because, like we talked about, the chance of Toronto's 5 starting pitchers getting 162 starts this year is just not very likely.
Yeah, Josh Johnson was back from injury last year, but he wasn't the same guy he was before his shoulder injury 2 years ago. And he never had shoulder surgery or anything like that. You never know if the shoulder injury is going to come back, and you don't know if he's ever going to be as good as he was a couple years ago. Ricky Romero was a mess last season, so you just never know. And that's why, we love baseball, because you just don't know. Anything can happen. You can't predict baseball. That's what they say. And so you look at these teams like the Dodgers and the Blue Jays, and you look what happened to the Marlins last year. Everybody thought they were going to be great, and they were terrible. And so it shouldn't be surprising if the Blue Jays weren't very good. If they were only a 3rd-place team, it shouldn't surprise you if the Dodgers were a 3rd or 4th-place team. Even if you look at those rosters now, I'm a roster guy. I love looking at teams on paper, but you shouldn't be surprised if they weren't really as good as you thought they were going to be.
Yeah, no, they definitely have to play the games in baseball. It's not like college football where if Alabama plays Kentucky, you pretty much know who's going to win almost 100%. Hopefully, since I'm a Giants fan, the Dodgers will not live up to their roster, but they sure do have a loaded roster.
It's fun to look at on paper, but I think I'm pretty good at going through rosters and saying, oh, okay, well this guy can be really good, but there's for every single guy you go, oh, but there's a chance, maybe he wasn't very good last year, maybe he was, there's always something that can happen. If this guy gets hurt, you don't have anybody to play behind him. It could, especially with pitching. You're looking at pitching, and if you have 5 great starting pitchers, there's some teams out there where you just don't have a lot behind them. And then one of these guys gets hurt, you're throwing a guy out there that's probably going to get killed every 5th day, and that's not a great situation if you're in a pennant race.
No, depth is key. Well, we'll see. Like you said, it's the great thing about baseball is that no matter what you say in March about who's going to win or who's not, it all is totally changed come October. Well, like I said to you folks, I would highly recommend checking out MLBDepthCharts.com. And, of course, we always talk about Baseball Prospectus. Being a subscriber to them or just going to their site and reading some of their free stuff is a great way to learn more about baseball. Jason, thanks for being on with us. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
All right, take care.